Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Questions over U.S. troop levels in Europe continue to circulate after mixed signals on deployments to Poland and broader NATO force adjustments, raising doubts about whether this marks expansion or reshuffling. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in India to repair strained relations and reinforce cooperation on energy, trade, and the Quad amid wider Indo-Pacific tensions. Now, we'll discuss it all further now with Dr. Eoin McNamara, researcher, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Good to have you with us.
Great. Good morning.
So let's begin with the latest. I mean, how do you look and characterize it this past week with this drawdown of forces from Poland, then it was changed, the redeployment this way and that way. Now we're getting new forces, apparently. So let's take it one bite at a time. So this whole week, what did it mean for that relationship between Poland and the United States and NATO?
Well, I think it's probably, at least for this week, at least, a case of all's well that ends well. But it doesn't look particularly stable when we see the picture of U.S. military force posture planning, U.S. strategic planning, that they flip-flop so easily on these things. So again, the question turns to Europe. Can we rely on the United States if it changes its mind so many times within such a short period on something so important as the U.S. force posture and the wider NATO force posture that influences in Europe? So unpredictability is the order of the day, and this is not necessarily too positive still for security in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, we have various sources, but I'm just curious, from the actual deployment of around 10,000 U.S. troops in Poland, if we look at now the number that President Trump has announced, I think on Thursday, it actually goes up by 1,000. So how much of a force posture difference does that make? How much of an impact will that 1,000 extra troop have on the whole of NATO's eastern flank?
Well, of course, the more troops, the better. But of course, 1,000 troops, I mean, it's about equivalent, little under what makes up some of the battle groups in the Baltic states. I know in Lithuania, they're heading, under German leadership, they're heading towards a forward land forces battle group of over 4,000 under German Bundeswehr leadership. The battle groups north of that in Latvia and Estonia would be a little over 1,000. So 1,000 troops is significant, but in the grand scheme of defense for NATO's eastern flank, an extra 1,000 is not huge in terms of the military effect that can come from it. I think what is most important here is that Trump did change his mind, that we hope Polish diplomacy was successful in convincing him to do that. And we hope that we get a bit more stability so that the posture can develop in a progressive manner rather than a regressive manner from now on. But I wouldn't be too sure about that. I will be expecting more twists and turns on this issue as the Trump administration progresses.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of those twists and turns, Owen, I mean, looking at what you've just said about how much also Polish government and various sources of Poland have really lobbied this past week, and there's been a lot of shuttle diplomacy on the highest level. I'm just curious, what does that also indicate for Poland? I mean, does Warsaw have more clout and influence now in Washington? Is that now one of the conclusions, or is that too early to tell?
Well, I don't think Trump has really had too much. How do you put this? He hasn't had too much hostility for Poland compared to maybe some of the hostility he has had, say, against Germany in the past, Angela Merkel, or indeed some of the messaging he has narrated against Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, this spring. So he's never had too much hostility for Poland. Polish diplomats have had a fairly significant relationship with his administration. And I think this time they have at least contributed to changing his mind on this. But of course, with the United States, it's so unpredictable. We don't really know their level of commitment to the measures they are taking, be it a drawdown or additional forces when they change their mind. And it's that inability to see the level of commitment that's very, very serious here when we think about the transatlantic security link.
Mm-hmm. And then also looking at, as an observer, if we look at what Russia thinks of this, I mean, first we've had drawdowns in Germany, then rotations, change rotations, now additional troops. So how does Moscow look at all this, you think?
Well, I think Moscow certainly likes what is seeing in this regard, uncertainty over NATO's eastern flank. A European in transition. We're talking about now the Europeans doing more and the Americans doing less, true NATO institutions. But of course, in terms of building up strength in NATO's force posture under more European leadership, that will take time. There are question marks over deterrence for NATO's eastern flank. That is good news for Moscow. But Moscow, of course, as we see from the picture in Ukraine, has its own problems there. They're shipping a lot of casualties. So I still think this is probably a little down the list, given the hurt the Kremlin is feeling right now on the battlefield in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also looking a little bit wider now, I mean, we've had also Secretary of State Marco Rubio was also trying to reassure allies. How do you think his presence, did that in these last days really help in terms of calming allies? I mean, now he's in India, but I mean, his trip through and meeting the NATO Secretary General and European allies, what did his presence here do?
Yeah, I think Rubio was playing a very, very difficult game. We know from his previous political experience that he's a strong grasp of security issues in Europe. He understands the importance of US leadership for NATO's eastern flank. But of course, he has to get along well with his boss and his future political ambitions as well, probably. And he probably needs support from that MAGA base, however that turns out in the United States. So I think Rubio, reading between the lines or signaling between the lines, has done an okay job to manage this mini crisis on drawdown that we've seen this week. And now, of course, he's in India. That's a big issue as well. Hopefully, we make some progress on India agreeing to buy less Russian energy from its shadow fleet. Because, of course, the world is very connected, particularly the shadow fleet and maritime security in Europe, the North Atlantic, the Mediterranean, out into the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the fueling of Russia's war economy from oil revenues bought via the shadow fleet, it all interconnects. So hopefully Rubio, now in New Delhi, can have an impact there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask you a bit on that a bit further. And one of the things on his agenda these next few days will be this topic of the Quad, right? This framework of ideas, security nations, U.S., India, Australia, and I believe Japan. So, I mean, we've not seen too much on that front in terms of any leader summits. How successful is he going to be of addressing that? Where is that relationship in all this?
Well, I think it is an important relationship to bring India closer to the Western alliance system. Japan, Australia are very close allies of the United States. And we've seen in Indian foreign policy that Indian foreign policy is very multi-vectored. They're close to the United States one minute, they're close to Russia another. They talk about repairing their partnership with China another day. So they have a very multi-vectored balance of influences type foreign policy, and it's very ambiguous. Maybe New Delhi wants it that way as to their strategic alignment. So certainly it would be an advantage for the global West if we talk about Japan and countries like Australia, South Korea, in that if we could convince India to put some of that posture aside and align more with Western interests.
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, we've just had that meeting also between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in this region. Is India now more important because of the, let's say, difficult relationship with China and the United States? Does India matter more now to the U.S.?
Yeah, China is, India is a very important country strategically in Asia for the United States and the global West, and the Western presence and influence in the Indo-Pacific. So, of course, getting back to what you mentioned, trying to bind India further with the Western fold, I think an institution like the Quad and as well bilateral security cooperation between the US and India is going to be very important in the future if it works. But of course, that will depend on the level of tension in the West's relations with China. I think right now, China has a very ambiguous and uncertain posture itself. There's an element of don't interrupt your enemies when we might talk about the West, when we might talk about Russia even with China. Don't interrupt your enemies as they're making a mistake, or at least as they are strategically weakening themselves internally. So we'll see. China is definitely weighing up its options and planning for the long term its next moves.
All right, and we'll be following those.
In India is a good balance against that strategic behavior from Beijing.
Right, and we'll be watching those moves closely here. Thank you so much for all that. Really appreciate your insight. As always, Dr. Eoin McNamara, their researcher, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
And thank you for joining us here on World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.